Shalom, giving all praise to the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachahakodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders at Great Millstone who rule well. And as always, we give peace and salutations unto the elect. And I wanted to do a quick lesson. I'm not going to go too deep into it on the difference between a wife and a concubine. And me and a few brothers were discussing this earlier in the chat, and also I remember a while back I was asked this question, but I did the research, but I never got around to doing a video. And I'm not going to overcomplicate it. The basic, answer is that, a concubine is usually a wife through bondage. A bondwoman like Abraham had Hagar, which was the bondwoman, and Sarah was the free woman, in which, Isaac was the only child he had by a free woman, and Isaac was heir to the promise. The bondwoman was usually acquired through, us Israelites taking down a heathen nation and subduing them, and basically her putting away her gods and various different things that particular nation worshipped, and customs, and taking on to your customs and your gods. Or if a poor Hebrew family was in dire need, they would sell their daughter, to you, all right, a man of substance, as a bondwoman, as a wife that will come into your house and ultimately help you and your household for whatever purpose was needed. Whereas your wife was usually of your nation, and ultimately, whether it be through an ordained marriages, because most marriages in our culture were ordained, where the father and the mother partook in, finding their daughter, a husband. And just like at the time of, Jacob and Esau, the mother had a part in helping their sons find a wife. So you had ordained marriages, but you also had, certain situations like Isaac and Rebekah, where they laid together and they became husband and wife, because ultimately sex consummates and completes a marriage. Some people, in our history, in our custom, didn't go through, because basically you would be betrothed or whatever for a while. You would pay the father the dowry. You all would have a feast, present yourselves to the community as a husband and wife, and then that night the marriage will be consummated. And that's usually with your nation, and in some particular cases your own particular tribe within the nation of Israel. Whereas with a heathen woman, you wouldn't have a ceremonial marriage with her, because a marriage is ultimately the joining of two houses. All right. So if you were to marry a heathen woman like that, in the case where, she brings her gods and her family brings their worship and practices, and, that's ultimately how you could end up sinning against the Most High. So we'll get into a few scriptures, ultimately, and hopefully you be edified, because, a lot of people like to go to particular scriptures to try to make particular arguments, but they don't have understanding of the scripture, and Solomon is one of the men they go to, because of his dealing with the heathen women. And we'll get into that, because Solomon sinned by building temples and bowing to the gods of those heathen women. All right. Whereas his father David, where all of his sins were written and recorded, you notice him dealing with heathen women and having concubines of the other nations was not one of his sins. Why? Because he didn't bow to their gods. He didn't make marriages with them and build temples to their gods as his son Solomon did, which was a sin. Now, let's start here. I have from Bible Study Tools, and I also had an article. We can probably read a little bit of that, but I don't want to make this too long. And we already know that a lot of you are going to catch feelings and emotions, but we're going to go by thus saith the Lord. A lot of you boast in the law. Well, don't you know in the law, which we'll get, when you conquer a heathen nation, you're able to take their women, which that's what David did. Okay, you only sin, okay, when you start to bow to the gods of those other women. And yes, there were times, like when we were taking the land of Canaan, where we were permitted, all right, or forbidden not to deal or make marriages with those women. And we'll explain it all of that in the different situations and everything, all right, because this Bible must be read with understanding, all right, and you have to be mature. Ultimately, you have to put away Western culture and you have to put away your emotions, okay? So this is from Bible Study Tools. You have concubine. It says a female slave who functioned as a secondary wife or surrogate mother. And we've seen examples of this in the scriptures. A surrogate is a replacement, wherein you'll have a wife who can't bear you any children, all right, but in her place, the surrogate mother, all right, or the concubine would have children for you in her place, okay, because the purpose of a union, okay, yes, sex is an enjoyable function, but you know the purpose ultimately is to be fruitful and multiply, all right, and have a family, you know. And if you notice, the time you saw the term concubine mentioned was more so when we were a monarchy, you know, when we were sovereign, because the taking of more wives and the taking of more concubines is basically associated with kings and men of stature who had, you know, nobility and different, you know, possessions, you know, who had substance, basically. You know, you can read the scripture in the book of Ruth, where when the man found out that the land that he was going to, you know, redeem had a, you know, Ruth was involved in the deal. He said, I can't take on, you know, this burden because it'll ruin my inheritance. It'll ruin my household. Basically, I can't take on another wife. So Boaz, who did have substance, and it wouldn't have ruined his inheritance, took on the responsibility of taking Ruth as a wife along with the land. You know, just an example. You know, because you know we have all of these holdups and arguments about what the men of the Lord aren't going to have and what we can and can't do in the kingdom of heaven. Well, that's ultimately because we're in this low state, you know, but as the scriptures say, we're going to be kings and priests, all right, after the order of Melchizedek, all right. So at that point, there will be no question. You won't be, you know, you won't have the same mind frame of this Western world, you know. And yes, there will be a upgraded form of sex and reproduction in the kingdom of heaven, okay? And we will take wives, as the scriptures say. Women will be saved for the purpose of childbearing, all right? And a lot of them in this world look at that as something negative, all right? But that's the full purpose of a woman, all right? Now, of course, in the kingdom of heaven, the women, you know, that are married to the men of the Lord or any Israelite man will be absolutely blessed. All right, but we as the men of the Lord, especially those who are of nobility and high stature, we will take multiple wives and multiple concubines according to our liking, whether you like it or not. All right, and that's not something that I'm here to argue. I typically don't argue that point with women because it's no use, you know, at the end of the day. Now it says a female slave. A concubine is a female slave who functioned as a secondary wife and a surrogate mother. The Hebrew word for concubine is payalagash. All right, as a matter of fact, let me see if I can just get it here in the, yep, this is 2 Samuel 5:13. And David took him more concubines and wives out of Jerusalem. And this is once he set up, all right, and was crowned as king. He ruled 33 years in Hebron, all right, and 7 years in Jerusalem. All right, I believe there was some months in that 33 years and maybe 6 months or something. But ultimately, and there were yet sons and daughters born to David. Okay, and we know David's sins are all recorded. The fact that he had concubines of the heathen nations was not one of his sins because his mind was right. David did not bow to their gods nor make those sort of marriages with them. Okay, he subdued them and according to the law took those women that he basically had a liking to, and that's in the law. We'll get that. The word for concubines is pa ya la gash, like polygamy, huh? Interesting. Concubine, paramour. Let's look up this word for paramour. I've never seen that. A lover, especially an illicit partner of a married person. Beloved, a kept woman, mistress, significant other. All right. So it says is a non-Semitic loanword borrowed to refer to as a phenomenon not indigenous to Israel. Okay. Babylonian and Assyrian law codes regulated primary and secondary marriages more specifically than do the Old Testament laws. Exodus 21:7-10 has been appealed as regulative of some aspects of concubinage, but that only implicitly, right? Concubines are mentioned primarily in the early Israelite history during patriarchal times. All right, who are our patriarchs? You know, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. All the way up to David. Solomon. All right, it says the period of judges and early monarchy. See, monarchy. And what is a monarchy? A rulership, a sovereign. All right. When we were set up, okay, as a nation, and we had a king or a judge over us, okay, that's when you saw Israelites taking on more concubines and wives, all right, because we had substance. Now, the word for monarchy is a form of government with a monarch at the head. All right. So monarchy, sovereign state, principality, empire, such and such. So when you're set up, okay, it's better for you once your nation is set up and your laws established for you to do those things. Because like in the book of, let's say, Deuteronomy 7, when we weren't fully set up yet, all right, and we were taking the land of Canaan, those Canaanites, all right, their sons, their daughters, the men and the women partook in some very, very wicked practices. Okay, child sacrifice, bound to different deities and all sorts of wickedness. So in that case, here you have Deuteronomy 7:2, and when the Lord thy God shall deliver them from before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them, because that was the order, to destroy them, because the curse of Canaan had to be fulfilled. And thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show any mercy. And a marriage is a covenant. It's an agreement and the joining together of a house. All right. In the ancient world, you were very particular about who you married. Unlike today, where you're marrying women, you don't know their mother, their father. Everything's out of order. Okay, you would choose a wife according to the the nobility of her father. What family she come from, tribe, all of that. All of those things were taken into, consideration. You weren't just free will, willy-nilly going out and just, I'm gonna marry her like it's done today, which leads to what? Disorder and wickedness. The father pretty much has no, say so in who, in most cases, in who his wife married. The family don't have any say so. Families don't meet. You come from a family with a woman didn't have a damn thing, and all of these things have shown themselves that they're not fruitful, man. So this is why we cry unto the Lord to reestablish order. All right, it says, neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Now, a lot of people jump to this scripture to say, see, you can't make marriage, you can't deal with the heathen women. But there were proselytes, all right, women basically once you conquered a nation, all right, and basically took down, their fathers, their husbands, put them to death, that you would basically, her opinion would change, you know, over to your God. Okay. And basically she would put away the idols of her gods and she would be subject to unto your God. That can be found here in Deuteronomy 21:10. All right. Which this is what's going to happen in the kingdom of heaven. There will be no other God worshiped. There will be no chance for us to have bowed to another God. Okay. Deuteronomy 21:10, when thou goest forth to war against thine enemies, and the Lord thy God have delivered them into thine hands, and thou hast taken them captive, and thou seest amongst the captives a beautiful woman, and thou hast a desire unto her, that thou wouldest have her to thy wife, then shalt thou bring her home to thine house, and she shall shave her head and pare her nails. You see that? Because nails are associated with idol worship. Okay. And hair was associated with idol worship as well. All right. So it's basically a restarting point. Okay. Not that she couldn't have hair, but these different heathen nations, they did a lot of wicked practices with nails and hair, man. Even unto this day. All right. Even our women. All right. But it says, and she shall put off the raiment. All right. She shall put the raiment of her captivity from off her, and shall remain in thine house. Meaning what? She's under the influence of your God. Buddha no longer exists. It's Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shah. You're going to bow to my God. You're going to live by these rules. This is the food you're going to eat. This is what you're not going to eat. Okay. And in that case, and bewail her father and her mother a full month, because you just took down her family. So she's going to bewail her father and her mother a full month, and after that thou shalt go in unto her. See, that's the order. Okay. And be her husband, and she shall be thy wife. All right. Now she's your wife, but ultimately she's a lesser wife, a wife through bondage. Okay. She's not a sex slave. Sex slave is the practice of the heathen. Now she is for your enjoyment, but even more than that, she helps to forward your substance and works on your behalf, helps your, she would help your regular wife out or whatever situation you were in. But ultimately, she would be used to help forward your enterprise. And that's what a family is for. Okay. So it's beyond, just using her for sexual purposes. Of course, every man, enjoys sex. But there's business tied to sex, and different things that go with it. All right. And you would, take care of this woman to a degree. You would take care of her. She would have the duties of a wife. All right. But she's a wife through bondage. She doesn't get, the privileges of your Israelite wife. Okay. That you and her family made a covenant agreement. Okay, to forward two households and to forward your and joining your substance and all of that together. You don't do that with her family. You see, her mother and father are gone. They don't have any say-so in this matter. Okay, an example of that is Rahab the harlot. She fully bowed to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Salmon, who begat Boaz of Rechab the harlot, and she was fully down with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She was not talking about the different gods of the gods of her fathers and all of that. And she was a heathen woman. Okay, Ruth, which was a Moabite, which you have a lot of argument whether she was an Israelite or not, but she was down with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So once we take these nations down, we do have a law right here, that we can go to show you, yes, there is an order to having a concubine. And as we can read here, David, when he became king and took down those nations, those laws applied because he took him more concubines and wives out of Jerusalem. Okay, he took wives and concubines, man. Verse 2 Samuel 20:3, and David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 women. And see, this Western world and this Christianity condemns, having multiple wives, condemns, slavery, because they don't really follow the scriptures. Now, the slavery of the Western world and the way that things happen here is absolutely atrocious and wicked, because with a servant, with the slave, there is order. Okay, and you can find that in the book of Exodus, the 21st chapter, if we can get to that. But it says, and David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took 10 women, his concubines. So he had 10 concubines here, whom he had left to keep the house, and put them in ward, and fed them, but went not into them. So they were shut up until the day of their death, living in widowhood. All right, and this is just to show he had concubines. You can read that, story. But Solomon, his sin was he bowed to the idols of those different heathen. David didn't. There's nowhere written that David bowed to the idols of his concubines. Solomon did that. He built temples, okay, to Molech. You see, right here in 1 Kings 11:3, and he had 700 wives and princesses, and Solomon would go and get the choice princesses of these heathen, man, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods. That's the sin. Okay? And his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David, because David did not bow to those gods. Let's see what Solomon did. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. You see? And Solomon did evil on the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord as David his father. Okay, now as we showed you, David's sins are written. Nowhere is it written that his sin was dealing with the women of the heathen nation. Why? Because he did it in order. There is a order to a concubine. Okay? Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab. Now these are the heathen nations that, basically David subdued. Okay? But Solomon, all right, once he started dealing with their women, he started to allow them to worship those guys, and he even basically gave emotion to it and started bowing to him himself, man, which is an abomination, man. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burned incense and sacrifice to other gods. Okay, so this was Solomon's sin. Okay, now going back here to Deuteronomy 7:3, we were permitted not to make any marriages with them. You see, because they ultimately were a part of all sorts of abominations, and we weren't fully established yet. Okay, there's an order to it. All right, and Rahab, the harlot, is an example of one of the conquered nation who would ultimately work for the interest of the Israelites and bow to their God. You see, and that's basically a proselyte. All right, now a proselyte in the New Testament can be one who put away, an Israelite who put away the gods of the heathen, basically repenting. All right, but as we just read the law, we're dealing with those beautiful women of the heathen. Once we took them down, that we would basically bring them into our house. All right, and there's an order to her becoming yours. Okay, so Deuteronomy 7:3 does not take away from Deuteronomy 21:10 through 13. And when we get into the kingdom of heaven, we're going to take our enemies down. Okay, and we will enjoy the choice of their women. All right, according to our liking. Now, me personally, I love Israelite women. That's my thing. But I'm not. I'm a man. So hey, and at that time, if I have that privilege, then I will partake. And there's nothing anyone can say. It's not something that's up for debate. It's not something I want to argue about. I understand that there's emotions about it, but hey, that's your business. You deal with Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai, all right, on your own. Now, going back to concubine, okay, it says concubines are mentioned primarily in the early Israelite history during patriarchal times. the periods of judges or the early monarchy, although some later kings also had concubines. Okay? When concubines did not have While concubines did not have the same status as wives, as I told you. Okay, they don't get the same privilege as your wife that you made a covenant with her fathers and his house and all of that. That's why it would be better for you to marry of your own nation. Okay? And in this time, our people worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, so it wasn't really an issue. You join those two houses together, and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, okay, through his son is the authority over that marriage, not Ashtoreth, not Molech. They don't have anything to do with it. You marry a heathen woman like Solomon did, and her gods and all of that would be at the marriage. Her family would still be ultimately partaking in those gods. It's just basically that Solomon was in his older age and things started to get kind of out of hand. Okay, the order was being broken, and things were pretty much coming to an end for our 40 years of peace. That's why that happened. All right, so it says, while concubines did not have the same status as wives, they were not to be mistreated. And this is, over the years, you'll hear brothers, that we're gonna have sex slaves. That's a heathen practice. All right, we do things with class and in order. Well, like I said, yes, sex is a great thing, and it will be upgraded in the kingdom of heaven. As the scriptures say, we know not what we shall be, but we do read scriptures where we will reproduce. We will have children. Women will be saved for the purpose of childbearing. That's in the book of Timothy. So we know we're going to reproduce, but I can't tell you how that process is going to go and everything with the new body. All right, we'll just have to see that when it comes. But if we know we enjoyed it in this carnal state, how much more in our spiritual state? Okay, it will be a whole nother magnitude. It won't be anything like, this. It will be upgraded. Everything will be upgraded. It says, so she was not to be mistreated, and you can read that in Exodus 21:7-10. Okay, you had to deal in order. Remember, we are a people of class. We are representatives of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua. Sex slaves are ultimately of the heathen. Nor could they be violated by other men, like when Reuben slept with his father's concubine in Genesis 35:22. It says, with impunity, Genesis 49:3-4. It says, they seem to have received higher status if they bore sons, or at least they are remembered by name. You see, because children are a heritage unto the Lord. All right, and when an Israelite man goes into a heathen woman, the seed is still the seed of that man, which is an Israelite. He's just nourished by the egg. Therefore, he may take on some of the physical characteristics of his mother through mitochondrial DNA, but the seed is still of an Israelite. Okay, it was just planted in a different earth. All right. So I'm going to jump down here. It says the practice of taking concubines as wife was used to provide a male heir for a barren wife. Okay. So if your wife wasn't able to bear children, and we saw that with Jacob, then a concubine or another wife would come and bear children in her stead. All right. It says, in addition, the practice provided a social safety net for poor families who could sell their daughters in dire times. And we can see that in Judges 19, Exodus 21:7-10. Basically, if a family was poor or needed help, they could sell their daughter off to be a servant. And of course, this is all done in order. Hearing these things and looking at Western slavery, you automatically think negatively, but it's actually order in it, which, this Western society is the reason why so many people look down upon Eastern practices, and what was done in the scriptures. Okay. Now, you can read the rest of that. That's off of our Bible study tools. There's another article, and we'll read a little bit of this one. This is off of biblical gender roles. All right, .com. What is the difference between a concubine and a wife? It says the term concubine in the Bible refers to a slave wife. All right, there are two classes of wives in the scriptures: free wives and slave wives, and that's all that it is. Okay, the free wife was born of a free to a free man. She was acquired as a wife when a man approached her father and offered him the bride price. As we said, there's order in marriages. Okay, now in certain instances, you had cases of rape, or like a man and a woman may have met and just went to the tent, as Isaac and Rebecca did, and she became his wife that night. But ultimately, a wife, okay, or a marriage was ordained with the father and the mother, all right, or orchestrating it. That was the majority of marriages. There was order in marriage, but things happen, all right, and that's where in Deuteronomy 22, when we brought that up, people lost their damn minds. But in the case of, if the woman who was taken by the man was not betrothed to another man, okay, or married to another man, then he would have the option, if the father, was accepting of it, which in most cases he was, because this is a different society, different, different times, man. So he would basically, the man who took his daughter, even if he was mad, basically he would take the dowry that the man who took his daughter or raped his daughter, as people say, which rape just means to seize. It's not like the man beat the hell out of the woman and she's bleeding, but he took it. All right, and he would pay the dowry, and basically she would have to be his wife, okay, and he would have to be her husband, and they would have a union, which is a union that would lead to a family and fruit. Whereas in this society, look at the destruction that comes from how these cases are handled. And if you don't believe that Yahweh Bashem Yahushai's way is pure and fruitful, then you're the one with the problem. And you saw that when we brought that out, people lost it. And you basically would pay the father the dowry, because a daughter leaving his house is basically a service leaving his house. So you would compensate him for taking his daughter, because now she goes to your house. A daughter would usually be given away by the father before she would, bear children or be with another man. Okay, it was a shame for a woman to be pregnant, before she was given away, or found with child while she was living with her father. All right, but things happen. All right, it says if her father consented, he would give her as a wife to the man. To that man, usually accompanied by some kind of wedding feast. Like I said, they would have a feast, present themselves as husband and wife. That night, they would consummate the marriage by sex. Okay, enter into the bed chamber, and then the token of virginity would be presented, and so forth. It says, while both free wives and slave wives were considered to be property of their husband, a free wife held a greater place of social honor, and her children had inheritance rights that were required to be honored. The concubine's children had no inheritance rights unless they were granted under special circumstances. Like Abraham sent, before he died, he sent his, his bondwomen and their children away with, a particular blessing. All right, then it goes into how were concubines acquired. Slave wives were acquired in much the same way slaves were acquired in general. Sometimes slave women could be captured as prisoners of war and later converted to concubines. You see that? And we brought that out. Sometimes poor women whose father, brother, and husband has died sold them as concubines so they can be taken care of. Okay, like we said, it's all in order. You see, a man could sell his daughter as a slave to another man. And see, listening to this, you're automatically offended, because you don't know anything but the West. You can't read the Bible, okay, and think that you can understand it with the Western Hemisphere state of mind. This is a different time, different customs, okay? And this is the Heavenly Father's order, man. The man could either continue to use her only as a servant, or he could convert her to his concubine or give her as a concubine to one of his sons if he hadn't laid with her yet. Okay? Once a woman was converted to the status of a concubine, she had the right to have sex with her husband. Being a concubine in many ways was a step up for a slave woman, because you can just be a servant, all right, but once the man lays with you, then you're basically like a lesser wife. It's a step up from just being a servant, you see. So it was also common for fathers to give their daughters slave girls handmaids as gifts, as was the case with Rachel and Leah. In many households, the free wives ruled over the slave wives, while ultimately the husband was the master of the entire home. And in the kingdom of heaven, it's going to be the same way. You know, our Israelite wives will basically, rule over those lesser wives as concubines, all right? And not every man will have thousands of wives, but those with the substance and those with the, the status will. All right, and that's just the way it is. You got a problem with it, hey, take that up with the Most High. All right. Then it talks about Jacob and Leah. You can read this. I'll put it in post production. Concubines served as surrogate mothers, meaning they would bring forth seed for the barren wife. It says, were concubines basically sex slaves? While it is true that many pagan nations had sex slaves, the people of God in the Bible were forbidden from such practices. All right, if a man were to buy a slave woman with the intent of having sex with her to make the commitment of a husband to her, he could not simply have sex with her and throw her away until he wanted to use her again. There you go. While it was true that concubine was indeed a slave, the truth is that she was a wife as well. So there was duties. Okay, another way of stating this is truth. This is truth is that biblical times, all concubines were wives, but not all wives were concubines. See that? We will prove this concept that a concubine was indeed considered a wife in the next section on the rights of concubines. Did slave wives have any rights? Okay, it says today, when we think of slavery in any form, we think of a person who has absolutely no rights. And that's because of the way that Esau, all right, has dealt with his slaves. All right, in the way that these heathen deal, all right? But there is a right way to have a servant, and the Bible supports that, okay? It says, in fact, because of the abuses of slaves throughout history, we think all slaves were created and treated as nothing more than animals. But while God allows slavery, he also requires slave owners to respect the rights of their slaves. And it gives you, examples here in Exodus 21 and 20. If a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall be punished. If a man smite the eye of his servant or the eye of his maid, that it perish, he shall let him go, and so forth. Now we do know, according to the scriptures, we are going to beat the heathen over their head with a rod of iron for a period of 1,000 years. Okay, that's the judgment written. Okay, but after that 1,000-year period, we will deal righteously. Okay, we will deal righteously with them, and the punishment that they're going to get is righteous because it's written, and they're worthy of it. So it's going to take 1,000 years to pretty much get the heathen pretty much in order, to where they automatically know that this is the way to live, this is what to do, not to eat this, how to treat the land and how to treat the earth, man. Okay, if you knock out your maidservant's tooth, you shall let him go for free. So there's order, within having a servant, especially if it was a Hebrew servant. Okay. It says both free wives and slave wives, concubines, had to be provided with food, clothing, and sex from her husband. Okay, and there you go. You can read that in Exodus 21, 7 through 11. And there's order, there's responsibility with taking on, wives and concubines. This is why mostly kings and men with substance were the ones that you saw have those, like Nebuchadnezzar. He was a king. Okay, Absalom, he was the son of a king. Okay, Solomon, of course, he had riches out of this world, but Nebuchadnezzar, um, he had concubines and wives, and as they said, you heard more about this, during the patriarchal times. Whereas we here in this low state, we try to say, well, I got a concubine and all of that. Well, really, you just got, a little side chick or whatever, which all of that is about to be done away with, man. Okay, everything is going to be done in order, and it's not going to be anything anyone can say, you know. Um, Whether a woman was born to a free man or taken as a slave, if she were taken as a man's intimate sexual companion, she was to be treated as a daughter by her husband's father and treated by him as his wife. She would have the right to have sex with her husband, duty of marriage, the pledge of food, clothing, and bed, which was often used in our custom ceremonies, was based on the passage from Exodus 21. For more confirmation of the fact their concubines were not just slaves but were also considered wives. Okay, because let's say you have when we take down these heathen, and we do, take women, as concubines from amongst them, they're going to be all right, man. You know, there's going to be some, amongst, these heathen nations that are gonna, we ain't touching them. They're going to be through. But the ones that we do take, just imagine, although they'll be your servant, they'll have access to seeing things and access to things that, those of their nation wouldn't have. Like people get bugged out over Ruth, saying she would have to be in Israel. Even if she was a Moabite in the kingdom of heaven, she's going to be given, back, to Boaz, and she'll be good. She'll be all right. All right. This is real life here, man. And ultimately, it takes just being mature in the spirit. A lot of our people, this Western society has made them immature in the way that Esau tells you what a man is, what a relationship is, what love is, and all of that. It's really skewed and destroyed the minds of our people into where when they hear the ways of the ancient world, all right, you'll lose your mind. It was a totally opposite way that we dealt. All right. It says, consider why Keturah is referred to as a wife Abraham took after Sarah died, but she is referred to as one of his concubines in 1 Chronicles 1:32 and 33. And then it goes on. It says, the reason Abraham sent away his concubines and their children, as he knew his death was imminent, was to make it clear that Isaac was the only rightful heir or heir to his estate, being the son of the first wife, who was the only free wife he had. All right, which that is used in the book of Galatians as a allegory, which Jerusalem is free. Okay, and Isaac was the heir to the promise, and he passed that to Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons. All right, thus the 12 tribes of Israel. All right, were concubinage, slavery, and polygamy sins that God overlooked? In this post, we have discussed some topics that are all very offensive to our modern cultural values, and that's the problem. That's why the scriptures say, seek ye the old paths. Okay? This is the part of the article where 99% of Christian writers will tell you that the practices of concubinage, slavery, and polygamy were all sins God overlooked for a time, but when God got rid but then God got rid of in the New Testament. The truth is that God never condemned the practices of concubinage, slavery, or polygamy. You see that? And even the writer of this article knows that. Okay, but our people, even you who call yourselves Israelites, you're under that spirit. In the kingdom, you're going to have one wife. Well, that's all right. We'll see. That's all I got to say about that. It says, he gave strict rules as to how these things could be practiced, but he never condemned the practice himself. All right, so with that, hopefully I will edify. Shalom.
first man is of the earth, earthy. The second man is the Lord from heaven. As is the earthy, such are they also that are earthy. And as is the heavenly, such are they also that are heavenly. And as we have borne the image of the earthy, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly. Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, neither doth corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, which giveth us the victory through our Lord
Hamashiach Yahushai.